This is The Difference Makers, a Paladin security podcast. Each week, we take you inside the world of security for a first-hand look at the inner workings of the industry. But it's about more than just protecting property and manning events. It's about going above and beyond to make the world a safer and friendlier place.
Welcome to The Difference Makers. I'm Christina Haydanis with Paladin Security. Today, Paladin Security Group Executive Vice President Tony York joins us to dive into the world of healthcare security. Tony has over 25 years of experience in the industry and is a security expert, business leader, and mentor with a passion for healthcare. Today, he shares his thoughts on everything from violence in healthcare to how to become a leader in the sector. Well, Tony, there's so much to talk about, so let's just dive right into it. You're an executive vice president for the Paladin Group of companies, working out of Colorado for PalAmerican and Paladin, too. Tell me a little bit about where your interest in healthcare came from.
You know, it's a great question, and it probably stemmed from a family dinner table when my sister, who was 6 years older, and it was in the pre-HIPAA environment where it wasn't really inappropriate to actually talk about what you saw at work. And I would hear her chat about some of the admissions that she would see and some of the activities that were going on in the emergency room that she was working in. And I'm in my late junior year high school, early high school arena hearing that, and I just was fascinated by that. And so as I went through my college studies, I was able to do something where I was focusing in my criminal justice major on private security, but a requirement was to do an internship. And I did that at North Carolina Baptist Hospital. And I saw a very sophisticated security program that was incorporated into risk management. And from there, my love of healthcare security just really blossomed, Christina. To be able to help people that would and keep an environment safe, but still maintain the mission of care that was so critical for people to heal themselves and to be able to come to an environment where healing could occur.
Yeah, I love that. And then you wrote a textbook for healthcare. You wrote the textbook, I guess, for healthcare security. How has healthcare, I guess, just expand a little bit on what you were just talking about. Like, how has healthcare personally affected you?
Well, you know, it's amazing to be a part of that progress of seeing the industry just continue to evolve. And, you know, one of the things that I don't think many who are outside of the industry fully appreciate is just how much just violence that happens inside of the environment. And the violence is not the traditional going postal, like when I first got into the business and we think about traditional workplace violence. It's really stemming from the people that we invite in. And oftentimes it's not really the intentional nature of someone to be ugly and to cause harm to somebody else or to themselves. But they're in the healthcare organization because they might have a psychiatric disorder or mental concerns, or maybe they've just been having some problems with withdrawal or other issues with alcohol and drugs, and sometimes it's just something as simple as they were in an automobile accident and they got a closed head injury, and it's impacting their ability to see what needs to be done in the right manner. But they still need care, and they still need someone to be able to create an environment so that care can be rendered safely. And for so many years, the staff members that were providing that care were having to basically manage the situation on their own. You know, when I first got in the industry, we had orderlies. Orderlies were someone who were part of the medical treatment team, but they really weren't clinically trained, but they were folks that could help manage some of the issues that were being faced that I just described. But Christina, what was so interesting is those roles discontinued themselves in the 90s. And then all of a sudden, here comes this request of security. And how was that really going to be impacted? And seeing the data that has now stemmed since all of this has unfolded, we're seeing a lot of people who are getting hurt inside of healthcare. And frankly, that means people are leaving the healthcare industry and what is such a valiant profession, where people are there in training to help others. And that's really their entire mission. And the goal that I guess is so intrinsically motivating to me is, how do we create an environment so they can stay safe? They go home safe. They're not sitting there getting assaulted or verbally abused. And, there's a lot of techniques that we can deploy to assist with that. But a lot of it is also just a matter of just being good educators and bringing awareness to the problems, not only with us as security professionals, but to those that are really allocating the resources to inside of the healthcare organization themselves, the leaders and the administrators that are really pulling the trigger on a lot of those decisions.
Yeah. And I want to touch more on training for that in a second, but I wanted to ask first, I remember you did a talk for an internal presentation for our company a few months back, I believe, about weapons safety and violence in the healthcare setting. And it is, like you mentioned, such a big thing right now in the States. Well, sounds like it has been for quite a while. But has that increased, especially during COVID in the last year and a half?
It has, and it's increased in sort of two ways. One, we're still seeing the level of violence that we've always seen in our higher risk departments, the emergency department, the ICU, oddly enough, even general med surge, where we are finding that nurses aren't quite as prepared to be ready for those kind of situations. But one of the things that happened with COVID is we actually introduced some very restrictive visitor screening protocols. We were asking people to mask. We were asking people to get their temperatures. In some states now, we're even having to ask them, do they have vaccination? And which gives them access to some places that they wouldn't be able to go to otherwise. And it's caused a lot of just, I'll call it ugly behaviors to not just security staff, but folks that are in patient registration and patient access, those at the very front line that are really making them feel uncomfortable. And so we've had to really spend a lot of time with them about how to prepare for managing that type of disruptive, just, I'll call it ugly behavior. I don't know of a better term, because it's just verbal abuse, probably more so than anything. People not wanting to comply, or maybe it even comes into just wanting to complain about what's happening. And I think a lot of that is just the fatigue that COVID has had on so many of us throughout all walks of society. But unfortunately, when they come into the hospital, they're already a little bit more emotionally charged, and it seems to manifest itself in their words more so than their actions. But you can imagine if you're on the receiving end of somebody who's just really laying into you because of a policy that is right, but you're not there to write it. You're there to enforce it. It's a difficult situation. So we're seeing a lot more of those kinds of issues, not just the physical concerns that we see, especially in our medical treatment areas.
Yeah. And you mentioned the emotions that come from people during this time. How tough is it? Like, what are some of the stories that you've been hearing? Like, how tough is it for our officers to be able to deal with it all on a daily basis?
They've had to really, really develop some thick skin. The de-escalation techniques really have been critical for them to understand the emotional continuum. And what we've tried to help them all understand is how to look the eyes of somebody else and see the world through what they're looking at it through. I call it empathy. And we've been spending a lot of time trying to help our team understand why would somebody feel this way, and what can you do to help them understand that, hey, you know what, this is something that we're doing for the better good. It is something we really need you to comply with, and it is, and so we're asking and not just telling, but sadly, we're not allowing them to go into the organization if they're not willing to comply. But we're trying to really do it in a positive manner. But our teams are really finding themselves taking a lot of abuse, and that takes its toll. When we're talking about being an organization that really prides itself on world-class customer service and making folks feel very warm and welcomed to the environment. It's hard when you're having a conversation and the one that was just happened beforehand, you just got berated for something that all you're doing is really helping maintain compliance for how to keep an environment safe. Obviously, there's some different impressions about COVID that are shared, and not everybody follows the science exactly as we listen to it and hear them share it. And those are some folks that really have historically been very vocal in trying to describe what their opinions are. And that's a difficult situation, but we're all trying to ask our people to actively listen, to hear them, not to just interrupt and to stop them, but at the end of the day, still make certain that the individual that we're interacting with understands what we have to have them do to be able to enter into the organization. Mm-hmm. But the hardest thing, Christina, has been when we have very restricted access, especially to those areas where we are caring for COVID patients, and someone who is not allowed to see their loved one, or there's very, very limited access to one person, and being the one that has to communicate that message. It takes a great level of empathy, and it takes an opportunity to just be a very kind and considerate soul. And obviously we have a lot of those individuals in our organization, but it really pulls on the heartstrings. And I could tell you, in talking to a lot of our officers, probably the hardest part of all of this, they can take the berating more so than they can having to deliver that message about the restrictions that are there. And they're there for all the right reasons. It's not a question of that, but it's still, if you're on the receiving end of that answer, it's still a hard one to comprehend and to swallow.
In times like that, when you hear stories like that, you must be so impressed with, how the officers are able to handle situations like that.
I have such an admiration for our healthcare security officers and the profession in general. It is expected to maintain just phenomenal customer service skills while also understanding that sometimes situations are not going to be able to be handled with words alone and de-escalation techniques, that it does require some physical interventions when folks may be a harm to themselves or harm to another, and we have to get control of a circumstance to basically render care. Yeah. And it's amazing to me how the role has evolved. And I think it's important that we continue to strive to raise that bar of professionalism. I think the officers themselves deserve it. And I think they will welcome the continued training that professionalism has to offer to just continue to push that bar forward.
For sure. Tell me a little bit more about the training. You've talked about empathy, you've talked about de-escalation, but tell me what else is involved with training to become a healthcare security officer.
Yeah, it's one, we look for people that have a great attitude because we know it's a very service-oriented, customer-fronting position. So we put a lot of attention on customer service, what to look for in helping it. And why do we do that? One, we know it's just a great experience we're trying to create, and our clients want that, right? We want to be hospitable to those that are entering. But two, we also know that good customer service is also good security. When people are greeted and acknowledged, the criminologists have helped us understand that they're less likely to do harm against us. They're less likely to steal from us. They're less likely to just walk into the environment unnoticed and do harm. Now, that's a big part of what we do. We have to spend a lot of time on just I'll call it de-escalation techniques, but even before de-escalation, how do you start realizing the emotional continuum of others and see if you can't interact? Communication with others is such an important role that we want to make certain our officers are able to really understand how to have the best conversations they can. Maybe delivering a hard message, but it could also be just to help someone who's just agitated or nervous or just uncomfortable because the healthcare environment is not one you go to because you want to be there. It's very few times, maybe those that are giving birth, but beyond that, it's usually a very stressful time in someone's life. And saying that, we've spent a lot of time just helping them grasp that. But de-escalation techniques also goes all the way into the management of aggression, where someone is much more aggressive and having to get engaged, and how do we position ourselves? What kind of defensive techniques do we have in case someone really gets volatile, not just with their words, but with their physical actions, all the way into being a part of the care team that has to go in and get a control of a situation so that we can actually create a safe care environment, which may mean that we have to be a part of helping the care team just go in and physically control someone safely, humanely, in a manner that is done. And although it doesn't happen with great regularity, it does happen in most every healthcare security officer's life. This is not a observe and report role only. It is physically engaging. And that means not only with patients, but the patrolling officer themselves. What to look for on patrol. We really want the visibility of that officer to be something that they look the part of a professional, they know that part of a professional, and they do their part when they're called upon. And patrol basically is what you're looking for. It's not just walking around. It's really having a plan for how do you understand what's normal in a department? So when you see something that's not normal, you're able to say, flag it and investigate further. But observe and report does have one component of that. We are always watching and trying to help maintain a safe environment. But reporting techniques and understanding how to document the things that we see, the events that we're involved in, it's very important. Our reports are used in many different ways by the healthcare organizations and ourselves. And so we put a tremendous onus on making certain folks understand how to leverage those actions and that they're taking, but also the observations that they're witnessing, and putting that into a place that we can use that for trend analysis and understanding what that might mean to our overall security protection program.
Mm-hmm. And maybe just elaborate on that a little bit. We talked about violence also, but what are some of the big issues that healthcare security is facing in both the U.S. and in Canada?
Well, one, it's very highly regulated. So especially in the U.S. market and to a large extent in Canada as well. And what does that mean? It means that we have to have programs in place. We want to have a lot of training in place. Very rarely is the security of a healthcare organization going to be limited to the patrolling security officer. Critical element, the physical presence of that officer is always going to be necessary. But we have to be able to use force multipliers. And that's really where our education programs come into great play. We want to not only do our officers need to understand the principles of de-escalation and aggression management, but we also want those care providers to have a full appreciation of that so they can keep themselves safe when we may not be around or we're in the midst of responding to a request or a call for service. And it's really important that we do that. Now, we also like to supplement everything that we're doing with the built environment itself. Ideally, if we are working with an organization and they're building out a new tower or doing renovation to a department, we'd love to be able to come in and help them understand how to create a safe environment through how we control access and how we actually use the flowage of traffic in and out of their environments. But there's layers of protection that we can incorporate that we believe through lines of sight that might be happening from a nurse's station to just where we position a bed or, frankly, a nurse's workstation inside a patient's room so that we never actually have a patient or a visitor be between the nurse and an exit pathway. So they're not actually in that environment where they can't get out if they need to. But these concepts are also going to be supported with a tremendous amount of technology. Video surveillance and access control devices are staples inside of healthcare security. To be able to see where we can't, to do mobile patrols and remote video monitoring, especially as the healthcare environment is not just the hospital proper anymore. The distribution of care is going outside of that campus, and we're seeing clinics and we're seeing other locations that we need to have a presence of security, but we may not have the same volume of security staff just because the risk may not warrant it, but we want to be able to at least see and understand what's happening. There's other communication devices we'll use too, because we do want people to have a good direct means of communicating with us, whether that's through a duress or panic alarm system, a good telephone extension that goes right to us, or it might even be some blue light emergency communication towers that we use in the external environment, just to make certain people understand two things. One, you can reach us immediately for service or a need of emergency, or it could just be that we're trying to make certain that we're using what we like to call target hardening, making anybody who might be thinking about doing harm against us, that most importantly, security is taken with great importance around here. And that's just the visibility of the patrolling officer, might be use of various patrol vehicles, a car, a bicycle, a Segway, other kinds of tools and instruments that we utilize just to show that the security officers themselves are very visible. But these are all components of the healthcare security program that are critical. But all of that should be melded into what we like to refer to as a general master security plan, things that say this is what we do, why we do it, and some of our goals for what we're trying to do to continuously improve. I mean, and that's something I think most of our healthcare organizations have come to really appreciate and respect about how we apply our principles of security.
Well, what role does Paladin and PalAmerican play with influencing healthcare security at a global level?
We've taken it very seriously to not just try to help improve our programs and what we're doing for our clients, but to try to be influencers at the industry level. Historically, that has involved us being very active with the International Association for Healthcare Security and Safety. We've been working closely with that organization to really write and craft the industry guidelines that are more operationally impacted, things that would talk about how we ought to be managing infant abductions and drug diversions, and things that might be security and staffing and the planning that should go around, so folks have a full appreciation of what baselines they should be following. And they're written almost in a checklist approach, Christina, that helps people sort of understand what questions they should be asking themselves when they're contemplating some of these issues. Additionally, that group is also working heavily with design principles to help the built environment itself be delivered in the safest way possible. And whether that's managing violence or it's just managing the external environment and how landscaping and lighting should be an active component for the protection program as a whole.
Is that something that Paladin and PalAmerican has taken the initiative to do, or has it been more of a collaborative approach with the IAHSS?
I would say it's been a little bit of both. We've been very engaged as a company almost since the inception of the Guidelines Council. We really, as an association, there was a strong desire to make certain that it wasn't just U.S.-centric type of a understanding of healthcare delivery. And we've had members of the Paladin family be actively engaged with that council since its earliest inceptions. Don McAllister, who was a longtime employee within the Paladin family and just recently retired from our group, was a very key cog. He was on the board of directors at the time the Council on Guidelines was initially established and was a critical component of that, and was very actively involved with that group until his retirement a year ago. And I think we still have members such as myself that are very actively involved with writing these guidelines, which are establishing the minimum thresholds, but probably the term I would use, creating the standard of care inside of how healthcare security should be delivered within hospitals and healthcare facilities across not just Canada and the U.S., but across the globe.
Now, we've touched on the training, the what healthcare security involves, and all that type of stuff. So, how does one become a healthcare security leader, and what are the paths that they can take?
The answer to that is really a wonderful way to answer something, and that is, it's quite unlimited. I said earlier, we want to have people who have good aptitude and attitude. If they have a good attitude and an aptitude to learn, it's amazing what we can teach them, because the one thing that is a hallmark of the Paladin and PalAmerican security programs is what we're doing to train and educate and develop our staff. Mm-hmm. And that's for the roles that they're in today, but also for the roles that they could be in tomorrow. We have positions that are maybe a duty officer of a shift, or sometimes we refer to that as a shift supervisor as a first step. We have other positions where they may be carrying additional equipment that would allow them to get additional training to really enhance their value to an organization, just because they might be carrying a taser or a firearm. Those are mostly in the U.S., mind you. But we also really believe in having leaders. And the leadership of a security program is often one of the most critical positions. And so what we like to do is use our management training programs to develop those leaders, to really look at our high potential that are in our security staffing, but also look at them for varying roles. And those roles actually have layers within them. So we may have a site supervisor who would be one of the maybe a little bit of a smaller hospital, to a program manager who could be responsible for a larger hospital and really actively involved in the leadership of that organization, serving on committees, writing policy on behalf of the healthcare facility and us, all the way to someone who may have responsibility for multiple hospitals. And so that site leadership role can have many degrees of variability, but it also opens up a whole pathway. Beyond that, it's amazing to see the volume of people that actually don't work inside of the organization itself, but work in support mechanisms. And so as we really work closely with those folks that have been with us, we have people working in our finance department, in our IT department, in our lean thinking, and our process improvement initiatives that have actually started working as a security officer. Many of them in healthcare, because healthcare has been such an important vertical market for Paladin and PalAmerican since inception. But it's amazing to see how that has all evolved into even roles outside of just the security infrastructure. But our area security leads, our customer service management staff, all the way to our regional operations directors, to the leaders of our organizations. To me, it's an amazing story to watch that. I know it attracted me immensely to the organization because I had a similar path in my own right, and it was one that it's rewarding. And Paladin understands, and so does PalAmerican, that to have a promotion from within philosophy, one that is so strongly followed inside an organization, we have to have a development program that follows suit. And there's tremendous investment in helping each leader at each stage really have a successful run, from direct and formal training to assignment of mentors to just assistance to helping them understand some of the challenges that they may not have been exposed to because it's the first time. But they don't have to learn that bumpy road of trial and error on their own. They have people that will walk them through and help them through that and try to hit the smooth patch. It's very impressive to me. And I think folks that can now see the security arena as one that a career can be made of. It doesn't have to be the first step into a law enforcement career. And frankly, there's been so many that have come to us and thought that was what they wanted to do until they got here and they realized, holy cow, look at the sophistication, look at what I'm expected to do, look at the type of career, and frankly, the remuneration that comes with that is really, really fascinating to watch how people can take something that not a lot of people understand when they first find it. But once they're inside it, they realize, wow, what a great way to give back and make it something that can be very intrinsically valuable to them and to so many others. It's become very powerful, and I'm impressed as I can be to see how that has played itself out over the years.
For sure. Well, Tony, your passion is so obvious. Talking about healthcare security, we really appreciate you joining us. It's been so interesting to hear about your expertise in the world of healthcare security and your knowledge. And looking forward to seeing where it goes. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina. All the best.
Thanks for tuning in to The Difference Makers, and be sure to check out new episodes on the first Tuesday of every month.